Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session at the Festival of Dangerous Ideas, We Are the Gods Now. I'm Anne Mossop from the Sydney Opera House. I'm one of the curators of the Festival of Dangerous Ideas. And it's a great pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon to hear from Jason Silva. When we were planning the festival, we really wanted to talk about the future and the impact of technology on the future. And because of our experience trying to talk about scientific topics, pessimistic topics, difficult topics, we decided we really needed to find somebody about the future who could talk about the future of technology in a way that was optimistic and exciting, and that was going to get people to think about these kind of very complicated and sometimes difficult issues with a positive undertone to what they were saying. And we were absolutely so excited when we came across the work of Jason Silva. And a few weeks after we'd talked to Jason and started to arrange for him to come, we found out that he was speaking at TED. And I was fortunate enough to see him speak there, introducing a video he had made for that conference. And I thought, yes, this is something that's going to be really wonderful to see here in the Festival of Dangerous Ideas. Jason is someone who's hard to categorise. He's not someone where I can say, oh yes, he's the author of X, Y, Z, and he's a professor here and there. Jason is a philosopher, a filmmaker, a visionary, I think, someone who above all is a really extraordinary communicator about science, about complexity, and about the future. So I'm delighted that he's here to talk to us this afternoon. Please make sure that your phones are on silent. Tweet to #FODI, which has been hacked because so many of you were getting so involved in the conversation that it became a magnet to a lot of people trying to get you to buy something else. But we're fixing that, and Twitter is still going through, so don't hold back. Jason is going to talk to us for about half an hour, 30 minutes, 40 minutes. And then there'll be plenty of time for questions and discussion from you, because I think this is something where you will get a lot of provocative ideas. So the opportunity to have a conversation with Jason today is going to be one of the great pleasures of this session. So please join me in welcoming Jason Silva.
Wow. Hi, everybody. How you guys doing? Hope you guys are doing great. We are the gods now. What a topic, huh? And I suppose for me, the big inspiration behind this came after I read Ernest Becker's book, Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Denial of Death from 1974. Pop culture reference for that book. It's the book that Woody Allen gives Annie Hall in the movie Annie Hall, and he says, look, you need to read this so you can understand where I'm coming from. And basically, The Denial of Death said that the human condition is characterized uniquely by our awareness of our mortality. In other words, we're the only species that is aware that we are mortal beings, and this causes a tremendous amount of anxiety. We would go mad if we hadn't come up with solutions to the death problem. And throughout history, Ernest Becker identifies three main solutions to the problem of death. The first one was the religious solution to the problem of death. You create a narrative in which your soul will live forever in the kingdom of God, and it gets rid of the death issue because everything will be taken care of in the end. Now, as science and technology increasingly made religion sort of more difficult to believe, we've had to come up with other solutions to the death problem. The second main solution to the problem of death that Ernest Becker identifies is the romantic solution. You turn your lovers into deities. She's like the wind, she's my salvation. It's the lyric to every pop song. She is the sun. But of course, no relationship can ultimately bear the burden of godhood. Eventually, your gods reveal their clay feet. And all of a sudden, we can't be saved by our lovers, and the anxiety about our mortal coil kicks in again. Ernest Becker says we are gods with anuses. We have this capacity to ponder the infinite. We're seemingly capable of anything. We can mainline the whole of time through the optic nerve with our astronomy and with our space telescopes, and yet we're housed in these heart-pumping, breath-gasping, decaying bodies. So to be godly yet creaturely is just impossibly cruel. The last solution to the problem of death that Ernest Becker identifies, he calls the creative solution. And I think this is perhaps the most interesting one for a variety of reasons. Of course, symbolically, the creative solution allows us to create great works of art, to create work that will outlive us and that will outlast us, to leave a sort of symbolic immortality and a legacy of that sort. But also the creative solution to the problem of death, I think, is the engineering solution. It's the way through which we remake the world. It's the way in which we transcend our limitations using science and technology. And this gets me really excited because this is ultimately how I see technology. Technology is a scaffolding. Andy Clark, the cognitive philosopher, technology is our second skin. Terence McKenna says it's the real skin of our species. Through technology, we transcend the limitations of thought, reach, and vision. We extend ourselves. We transcend time, space, and distance. Technology is our extended phenotype, as Dawkins says. It's really what we are. Our skyscrapers, our jet engines, that's us. Just like the termite colony is temperature controlled and it's a part of the termite species, so too technology is a part of who we are. Now, as Anne said, I'm a filmmaker, and my background is I worked in television. I worked for Al Gore's TV network for a number of years, and I fell in love with the power of short-form filmmaking. I felt that with short form, you could create content that could spread, that could be shared in the age of social media. And when I left Current TV, I decided to create a series of short films, micro-documentaries that look at the coevolution of humans and technology, because I fell so in love with this idea of technology as a means to transcend our boundaries that I felt like this was a narrative that needed to be put out there in the world, because we live in this world of doom and gloom. We live in a media environment where if it bleeds, it leads. And there's a reason for that. My friend Peter Diamandis, founder of the X Prize and Singularity University, wrote a book called Abundance, Why the Future Will Be Much Better Than You Think. And in the book, he talks about how we have these overactive amygdalas that we've inherited from a time where we used to live in the savannas of Africa, and it was biologically advantageous for us to be really nervous all the time and always looking for danger, right? Because it kept us alive against the tiger, so that the tiger wouldn't eat us. And we've inherited that. But now we live in a world that is increasingly safer, increasingly less violent. I don't know if you guys know the work of Steven Pinker, who says that the chances of a man dying at the hands of another man today are the lowest than they've ever been. Or the work of Matt Ridley, who actually shows the inexorable progress that we've made using science and technology and how the world has actually never been better. Or the work of Hans Rosling, who has the website gapminder.org, that went viral a couple of years ago because it showed how every nation in the world, by every measurable indicator, has been rising. Quality of life has been rising over the last 200 years. But we don't notice this because we have these overactive amygdalas that are just looking for danger. And our increasingly wired world is more than happy to showcase all the danger, even though it's less than there's ever been before. Anyway, I promise to go slow. So I decided that there was room to start a new conversation about how we see ourselves and how we see technology. And I felt that online video had become ubiquitous enough that we could actually create content that was short form, that was infectious, and that people could then spread. And so I started to do this, and I created a project, a series of shorts. I call them Shots of Philosophical Espresso. And the point of the content is to pull you out of context in such a dramatic manner in order to force you to gawk in amazement at the ubiquitous everyday wonders that we seem to be culturally disposed to ignore. Okay? So what I'd like to do today is actually want to walk you through a series of these short films, which will hopefully convince you that we are on our way to becoming gods. The first film I want to show you is actually an ode to the power of ideas, and let's play it, and then we'll talk a little bit about the themes. I love this idea of radical openness, the free exchange of information, the free flow of ideas, creating spaces in which ideas can have sex, as Matt Ridley talks about. And this is huge because it turns out that ideas are just as real as the neurons they inhabit, as James Gleick tells us. A new kingdom rises above the biosphere. The denizens of this kingdom are ideas, because ideas have retained some of the properties of organisms, it turns out. They leap from brain to brain. They compete for the limited resources of our attention. They have infectivity. They have spreading power. They are what Richard Dawkins calls the new replicators, born from the primordial soup of human culture. Their vector of transmission is language and electronic communications. And
Though ideas are not made of nucleic acid, they have achieved more evolutionary change, and at a rate that leaves the old gene panting far behind. Ray Kurzweil says our ability to create virtual models in our heads, combined with our modest-looking thumbs, was sufficient to usher in a secondary force of evolution called technology, and it will continue until the entire universe is at our fingertips. This is unbelievable stuff. It speaks to the telescopic nature of evolutionary change. More change in the last 100 years than in the last billion years. Terence McKenna actually wrote that from the moment that human beings invented language, biological evolution essentially ceased, and evolution became a cultural epigenetic phenomenon. Now, we take in matter of low organization, we put it through our mental filters, and we extrude it in the form of space shuttles and iPhones. The Imaginary Foundation tells us that what imagination does is it allows us to conceive of delightful future possibilities, pick the most amazing one, and pull the present forward to meet it. Imagine how impoverished this world would have been if we hadn't invented the technology of the oil painting in time for Van Gogh, or the technology of the musical instrument in time for Beethoven and Mozart to unfurl through it. With the revolutions in biotechnology and nanotechnology, the free exchange of information is allowing us to conceive of radical new things. Freeman Dyson says, in the future, new generation of artists will be writing genomes with the fluency that Blake and Byron wrote verses. What is great in man, said Nietzsche, is that he is a bridge and not an end. We're on a trajectory smack in the middle between the born and the made, wrote Kevin Kelly. And so radical openness, it's huge. It's a universe of possibility. It's gray infused by color. It's the invisible revealed. It's the mundane blown away by awe. We need to cultivate radical openness as a way of participating and accelerating evolution. Wow.
Wow, indeed. Thank you. Is that loud enough? Yeah? People often ask me, why video? Why art? At the end of the day, I'm not a technologist, I'm not a scientist, even though the message I'm putting out there is that increasingly a small group of passionate people, a small group of passionate technologists can do what only huge corporations and governments could do mere decades ago. And this is happening on the back of these exponentially growing technologies. And I'm going to get into that. But I'd like to share with you a line by Marshall McLuhan, which I think really sums up why I use short-form video to kind of infect people with awe. And he says, "It's always been the artist who perceives the alterations in man caused by a new medium, who recognizes that the future is the present, and who uses his work to prepare the grounds for it." Now, one of the things that video obviously talks about is the power of ideas to transform the world. You heard me say that even though memes are not made of nucleic acid, they still have achieved more evolutionary change, more change than biological evolution ever did. And in order to understand this, you have to understand that this change is happening on the back of these exponentially emerging technologies. Now, exponential growth is counterintuitive to the way our brains perceive the world. See, our brains evolved in a world that was linear and local, but we now live in a world that is global and exponential. Essentially, we have obsolete brains. Our brains cannot make sense of this rate of change, so we really need to educate each other. My friend Ray Kurzweil, who's a world-famous futurist and has an amazing track record at predicting these exponential changes, he uses a famous example. It's really simple, but I think it's important that people take it in order to understand what makes this kind of radical change possible. And he says, take 30 steps. If you take 30 steps linearly, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 30 steps later, you get to 30. That's pretty simple. That's how our brains make extrapolations about distance and about what's coming and about the future. Now, if you take those same 30 steps, but you take them exponentially, you would go 2, 4, 8, 16. 30 steps later, you'd be at 1 billion. That's the difference between linear growth versus exponential growth. 30 steps, 1 to 30, 30 steps, 1 to 1 billion. And that accounts for the reason that the cell phone in one's pocket today, the average smartphone, is 1 million times cheaper, 1 million times smaller, and 1,000 times more powerful than a supercomputer that was $60 million, half a building in size, 40 years ago. So what used to be half a building now fits in your pocket. So the tools to change the world are in everybody's hands. The supercomputers of yesteryear are in everybody's hands. A young person with a cell phone in Africa today has better communications technology than the US president had 25 years ago. This is also out of Peter Diamandis' book, Abundance. So consider what that means. So it used to be half a building, now it fits in your pocket. In 25 years, it'll be the size of a blood cell. It'll be reverse engineering us from inside. Computers trillions of times more powerful than the ones we have today will be inside of our bodies. You talk about the coevolution of humans and technology. People think technology is this separate artificial thing. It's in symbiosis. It's a who and what we are. It's a part of who and what we are. And eventually, we're going to close the loop because the technology is going to go inside of us. I'm very excited about the three overlapping revolutions we're seeing. Obviously, information technology, piggybacking on Moore's law. The computers get faster every 2 years, twice as powerful, half the size, et cetera, et cetera. They're shrinking. Then we also have biotechnology. Biotechnology means mastering the information processes of biology, understanding that our biology is software, and that software can be upgraded. Just like we upgrade our iOS on our iPhone, we're going to be able to upgrade our biological software. The famed futurist Juan Enriquez says, you know why this gets really exciting? Because when you can master the information processes of biology, you have software that can write its own hardware. Computers could never do that, but biology can. We had the world's first artificial organism created a few years ago by Craig Venter. Man creates life. Man becomes God. Alan Harrington wrote a book called The Immortalist, where he says death has become an imposition on the human race and is no longer acceptable. And any philosophy that accepts death must itself be considered dead, its questions meaningless, its consolations worn out. Perhaps these technologies are our rehearsal. Perhaps by reverse engineering life, we have decommissioned natural selection, as Edward O. Wilson says. And now we get to look deep within ourselves and decide what we wish to become. Evolution has woken up. Evolution has evolved its own evolvability. As Kevin Kelly said in that video, we're on a trajectory smack in the middle between the born and the made. Man is a bridge and not an end. The other revolution we're seeing is in artificial intelligence. We create non-biological intelligence, sentience that is not limited by the inherent limitations of biology, digital minds that can be endlessly upgraded. And people worry about it, right? They think the Terminator scenario because they're like, oh, those things are going to take over. But those things are us. They're us. The cognitive philosopher Andy Clark says we need to get over our skin bag bias, which is this assumption that's only what is within our tissue that is natural and that what we create is somehow unnatural. But that's not true. Technology is an outgrowth of the human mind. Technology is imagination made manifest. Technology is psychedelic. The word psychedelic means mind manifesting. Terence McKenna says we live inside of condensations of our imagination, and we really do. Somebody dreamed of flight. Now we fly in aircrafts all over the world. With our smartphones, devices made of plastic and metal, we punch a few buttons and we send our thoughts through time and space, transcending time, space, distance. We're gods. Another thing that's often talked about in this next video I'm going to show you is this idea of mind over matter, because obviously this is used in New Age bumper stickers. Oh, mind over matter, our thoughts can change the world. But I'm interested in more concrete examples of how imagination can transform the world. And I love the writer David Deutsch. His book, The Beginning of Infinity, really turned me on because he's just totally out there with his examples of mind over matter. So I decided to create a video that is demonstrative of just how our thoughts can spill over, terraform, and transform the planet, and maybe the universe. Next video, please.
2, 1, 0.
I am very much an optimist. I'm reminded of Rich Doyle's line from Darwin's Pharmacy. He says, dreams do not lack reality. They are real patterns of information. When the Imaginary Foundation says that the role of human imagination is to conceive of all these delightful futures, choose the most amazing and exciting and ecstatic possibility, and then pull the present forward to meet it. That is what we do. We bring our imaginings into existence. But I think that as technology has advanced, as we have found ways to outsource our mental capacities to our tools so much more, our ability to manipulate the physical world has increased in an exponential fashion. So we've been able to shrink the lag time between our imaginings and their instantiation in the real world. David Deutsch speaks in his new book, The Beginning of Infinity. He says, if you look at the topography of the island of Manhattan today, that topography is a topography in which the forces of economics and culture and human intent have trumped the forces of geology. I mean, the topography of Manhattan today is no longer shaped by mere geology. It's shaped by the human mind and by economics and by culture. And so what David Deutsch extrapolates is that ultimately that will be the fate of the whole universe. He says gravitation and antimatter might only shape the universe at its earliest and least interesting stages, but eventually the whole entire thing will be subject to the intent of substrate-independent, infinitely more powerful minds. And to conceive of that, it makes me feel ecstatic.
That's true. Thank you. I do feel ecstatic when I contemplate these possibilities. Just reveling in those possibilities gets me off. I have a mindgasm, literally. And I started to create these videos. A part of me is just because I'm a control freak, right? I'm profoundly haunted by the impermanence of life and by the impermanence of inspiration. Inspiration is a profoundly fleeting and profoundly lonely experience. And I think the goal of any artist, whether it be in paint or in song or in cinema, is an attempt to put people in one's head, to invite us to smash our sense of separateness and to say, this is how the dots connected inside of my consciousness. I hope that I can communicate that to you, and I hope that you can understand that. I'd like to share with you a quote by Alain De Botton, one of my favorite philosophers out of the UK. And he says, and this has to do with the power of art to communicate, to make people feel something, as compared to, let's say, journalism. So he says, the artist is willing to sacrifice a naive realism in order to achieve realism of a deeper sort, like a poet who, though less factual than a journalist in describing an event, may nevertheless reveal truths about it that find no place in the other's literal grid. I'm trying to get into the implications of what's happening on the back of these exponentially emerging technologies. When we reverse engineer life itself, when biology becomes the new canvas for our aesthetic design, what new forms of genius might come out of that? As Kevin Kelly said in my first video, right? How impoverished would this world have been were it not for the invention or the technology of the oil painting allowing Van Gogh to unfurl through it? What new genius will come out with inventions we cannot even conceive of yet? And people worry about disruptive technologies. They worry about their jobs. Half the jobs that exist today didn't exist 50 years ago or 100 years ago. Most of the jobs that are going to exist 20 years from now don't exist today. What new forms of artistry, what new forms of human expression, what new occupations and vocations will emerge out of these tools and our ongoing coevolution with these tools? And what I love about using cinema to convey these ideas was probably described best by Gene Youngblood in his book Expanded Cinema. He said that cinema, like life itself, is a process of becoming, a part of man's ongoing historical drive to manifest his consciousness outside of his mind, in front of his eyes. Now, something perhaps a little more practical that we talk about on the back of these technologies is the issue of big data and privacy, and companies and corporations and governments knowing more and more of our behavior and being able to take everything we do and turn it into an algorithm that can maybe predict what we'll want before we know we want it. And I was quoted yesterday in a panel, and that I think things like targeted advertisement or just engineered serendipity, it doesn't actually concern me. I'm more about the idea of radical openness, and when I think of big data, I actually get excited by the new forms of self-insight that might emerge from that. I read recently an article that said that apparently when forager ants hunt for food, the patterns of how they do that mirror the TCP/IP protocols that control information flow on the internet. What? I went to an exhibit at the MoMA in New York called Talk to Me, where they showed me this graphic animation that showed the world, and there was these things that looked like weather patterns flowing on it. And they were like, no, that's actually the diaspora of people leaving conflict zones. It looked like weather patterns. And I think what we're finding is that the more we can measure in the Internet of Things, walking around with computers in our pockets that are measuring what we like, what we buy, where we go, what we search for, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, when mapped out, when we get the long view, when we get the big picture, what we're seeing is these patterns keep recurring. From the nano to the galactic, from the organic to the man-made, we're realizing it's all part of a continuum, and all of it is nature unfolding. It's complexity unfolding. It's just unfolding in different scales and in different realms. But we are of nature. We feel like autonomous, free agents going around our lives, but then the patterns that work in the organic world, work in the man-made world. You know, I heard Stephen Johnson, who wrote his book, Where Good Ideas Come From, A Natural History of Innovation. He has a lot of great examples of how he calls the coral reef the city of the sea, because it turns out that the patterns of biological innovation in the coral reef that make it the most biologically diverse environment in the ocean mirror the patterns of innovation of cities, which are where the most memes are created. It has to do with the diversity and the collision of ideas and the amount of idea sex that's happening in cities as comparable to coral reefs. So what does this tell us? If we want to innovate more, we need to create these spaces in which ideas can have sex. We need to promote this free flow of information. We need to promote transparency so that we can gain more and more self-insight into how we work. And so I decided to make a video about this. This is my homage to big data. And I call it, it was inspired by Isaiah Berlin's quote, "To understand is to perceive patterns." So let's roll that video.
Understand is to perceive patterns. Now, of course, what this means is that true comprehension comes when the dots are revealed and you get Stephen Johnson's long view and you see the big picture. This is this idea about patterns, recurring patterns across different scales of reality. You know, Paul Stamets talks about the mycelial archetype and how the information sharing systems that comprise the internet look exactly like computer models of dark matter in the universe, look exactly like the neurons in a brain. They all share the same intertwinkle filamental structure. It's the rise of networkism as big data advocates talk about how man-made systems are looking exactly like natural systems. The more we can measure, the more we can visualize, the more it expands our consciousness by seeing these recurring patterns across scales of reality. It blows my mind, and I think that technology increasingly is becoming an expander of human consciousness. It extends our thought, reach, and vision, and revealing so much more. It's like, whereas once I was blind, now I can see. Jeffrey West from the Santa Fe Institute is telling us that cities are really like organisms. You know, alleys are like capillaries. How is it possible that a man-made artificial technological system is behaving like a natural system? The more efficient it becomes, the more it's starting to look like nature. Really interesting, weird stuff. You know, but it makes me optimistic. It's like when Stephen Johnson says, look, if we can understand all this stuff, we can, anything becomes possible, right? It's the adjacent possible, standing as a sort of shadow future, a map of all the ways the present can reinvent itself. It's beautiful stuff.
It is beautiful stuff. Thank you so much, guys. You know, I love Stephen Johnson. His new book, Future Perfect, talks about peer progressives and the power of peer networks to solve problems, which I think is amazing. But that last line about the adjacent possible, I think that's a great takeaway message for us to constantly probe our adjacent possible. I mean, don't you love that? The idea that we shouldn't look upon the world as it is. We should look upon the world and see what it could turn into. It's this shadow future. We should draw the maps of all the ways in which the present can reinvent itself. Now, those videos, when I started doing them, they were a non-commercial experiment. I created a name, I created an art form, I called them Shots of Philosophical Espresso. Really, it was just an excuse to communicate ideas the way that I enjoyed communicating them, which is like with this ecstatic excitement and this attempt to like immortalize and hold in stasis inspiration itself. You know, it's like, I think it's very indicative of this idea that we should not go quietly into the night, but we should rage against dying of the light. If the purpose of the human machine civilization is to transcend all previous limits and turn into gods, or as Stuart Brand says, we are as gods and might as well get good at it, then I was going to start by not letting those fleeting, exquisite moments of inspiration go to waste, but rather I was going to immortalize them, which is what I love to do, and then share them with people all around the world. And they've been seen, over a million times now. And I think it's indicative that people are hungry for this kind of like high-level discourse, but they want it to be compressed. They says this, I don't feel entitled to ask people for their time because I know that we're saturated in media and we have what's called cognitive bandwidth anxiety. We just can't process all the information that's coming at us. So that's really the inspiration for this. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, what I want to communicate to you guys is a sense of awe and a sense of wonder. One of my heroes, Carl Sagan, was exceptionally good at doing this. Timothy Leary, Bucky Fuller used to call themselves performing philosophers. They take these intergalactic-sized ideas and they use the power of media communication to spread those ideas, to turn them into self-replicating memes that can go out into the world. And this idea of awe as a kind of reassuring quality and ability to contemplate our own existence and marvel at ourselves. As Sophocles says, manifold the wonders, nothing towers more wondrous than man. It's about creating narratives that are positive. It's about awakening the mind's attention from the lethargy of custom and the film of familiarity and redirecting it instead to the wonders of existence, because there are an unending amount of wonders. And so I got really turned on when I saw this study out of Stanford that says, guess what? Blowing our minds on a regular basis is actually psychologically beneficial. Every time we push our perceptual boundaries beyond their limits, we are reborn and refreshed and reset, and it leaves us with profound benefits. So I thought, that's cool, because if my videos are non-commercial shots of espresso to inspire people with awe, and now awe is actually good for us, why not make a video that informs you with a bit of awe while telling you what awe is and why it matters? So for my last video, which is called The Biological Advantage of Being Awestruck, I am hopeful that it gives you the chills. And you'll notice I speak a lot slower in it because it's a more contemplative piece. And I hope that it elicits a sense of just cosmic wow. Watch the next video.
Eminent psychologist Nicholas Humphrey has written of the biological advantage of being awestruck. How fortuitous, he says, for a species to find that its own ability to contemplate, to marvel at its own existence, has been evolutionarily advantageous. In other words, it has been biologically selected for because it informs our life with a sense of cosmic significance that makes us work harder to persist and to survive. In other words, awe has helped us survive. And a recent study out of Stanford on the subject of awe kind of validates this idea. They have found that regular incidences of awe leave residual benefits upon the individual that persist, such as increased feelings of empathy and compassion towards others, increased feelings of altruism, and increased feelings of general well-being. In this study, they defined awe as an experience of such perceptual expansion, such perceptual vastness, that you literally have to reconfigure, upgrade your mental schemata just to accommodate, just to take in the scale of the experience. This is amazing. We've all felt this before. The first time we stared upon the Grand Canyon or succumbed to the immersive power of an IMAX film. But perhaps the most exquisite account of the experience of awe was articulated by the brilliant Ross Anderson when writing about the Hubble Space Telescope. Pay attention. He says that the Hubble has given us nothing less than an ontological awakening, a forceful reckoning with what is, allowing us to contemplate space and time on a scale just shy of the infinite. Why? He says gazing upon the famous deep field photograph literally allows us to mainline the whole of time through the optic nerve. To fit something so impossibly large to something so impossibly small. It's incredible. He says through the sheer aesthetic force of its discoveries, The Hubble distills the impossibly complex abstractions of astrophysics into these singular expressions of color and light, vindicating Keats' famous couplet, "Beauty is truth, truth, beauty."
Thank you. Thank you. That's cool. You know, and just even now, like this idea, this notion that an instrument of man, a cosmic optic nerve floating in space, can distill the abstractions of astrophysics into expressions of color and light. I mean, it just spoke so vividly to me. I'd like to share with you one more quote about just think of the telescope as a metaphor for what technology does as an instrument of mind expansion. In its time, and this is by Ross Anderson, in its time, the telescope has transformed the night sky from a decorative ceiling, a fixed sphere of glittering stick figure gods, into a universe whose reaches carry the seeds of this earth and new earths still. And I'd like to leave you with one more line that puts me in total awe. It's from a website called Next Nature that has been kind enough to feature my work. And they say that design, and this is what's important for artists really to pay attention to, design is about to undergo a paradigm shift. Today, design starts at the level of the atom. We are drifting into the world of the invisible. Virtual realities, nano and biotechnologies are increasingly influencing our aesthetics and providing new construction kits for our reality. And I think the big takeaway here can be echoed by, again, the brilliant Alan Harrington, whose out-of-print work, The Immortalist, I recommend to everyone. Gore Vidal called it the greatest book ever written. And he says, we must never forget we are cosmic revolutionaries, not stooges conscripted to advance a natural order that kills everyone. Thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you.
Great stuff.
Cool.